Welcome. PFD recently acquired a training house at 8126 Belmont. Over the next couple months, we're going to be using that for a variety of things. During this training cycle, we're going to focus on scene size up, handline deployment, and RIT operations. Size up must be conducted on all incidents. Scene size up serves two purposes. One, to make a quick evaluation of the nature of the incident and the degree of severity. And number two, to determine what initial actions need to be taken and the resources that will be needed. Size up shall include a 360-degree walk around with a thermal imaging camera whenever possible. There's going to be times where there's obstructions such as fences or something else from blocking us from getting into the backyard to see the Charlie side, but do it whenever we can. We want to use the TIC to make comparisons of all four sides of the structure. So basically, we're comparing the color on the camera, and we're comparing all four sides. Remember that the camera doesn't give us a picture on what we're seeing. The camera is going to give us a pictorial representation of heat differences. So if we have one side of the structure that's brighter than the other, more than likely that's where the seat of the fire is going to be. Reading smoke is also a critical part of size up. One thing we want to compare is we want to be evaluating the volume, velocity, density, and color. And when we refer to volume, it's the amount of smoke, the amount of fuel that's off-gassing. Consider the size of the structure that you're looking at. If it's a really big structure and we have a lot of smoke showing, just it's billowing from all four sides, there's probably a pretty good sized fire in that structure, regardless on the color, because it's going to take a lot of smoke and a lot of fire to fill that box. And when I refer to the box is the structure. It's going to take a lot of smoke and fire to fill that box up with enough smoke to start pushing from limited egresses such as eaves and windows. When we were talking about the velocity, how fast is the smoke leaving the structure? And that is in reference to the pressure inside the structure. So the more fire, the more heat, the more pressure we're going to have inside the structure. That's going to give you an idea on what the fire is like inside. And then when it comes to density, that's the quality of burning. That's perhaps the most important factor. Basically, the thicker and more dense the smoke is, the more dangerous it is. So if we have really dense black smoke and it's pushing with high velocity from the structure, if you don't see fire yet, it's probably going to happen because that's a precursor to flashover. And then the color is the other thing we want to evaluate. If we have, the white puffy smoke, if it's an ordinary size structure, a normal residential house, and we have that white puffy smoke, we call that laminar smoke. The box is still absorbing heat, and that fire is still in the early stages. If we have like a gray smoke, that box is starting to stop absorbing heat. It's getting to that point, and you're going to see that starting to turn black at a certain point, and it probably won't take very long. And then if you have a fire where you're seeing that brown smoke and it's not moving really fast, that means that the structural members they're in the early stages of being heated. So at that point, the fire's in the walls, or if you have a lot of brown smoke coming from the attic area, we know that the structural members are being exposed to heat. There's lots of factors to consider when we're performing a scene size up. Number of possible victims. If we pull up on the scene of a residential house fire and the homeowner tells us everybody is out for sure, that doesn't mean we don't have to perform a primary search, but we can now take that level of urgency off the table. More than likely is everybody out, but we still have to make sure. But now we can get the bulk of the fire under control, and then we can conduct that primary search. Occupancy type obviously has a lot to do with primary search and rescue. So if we're dealing with a senior facility like Ambrose Ridge, or we're at a nursing home, or we're at a school, we're going to need a lot of manpower to ensure that um, all primary searches have been complete. But it's probably going to be advantageous to shelter some of those people in place while we get the bulk of the fire under control. Because if we just focus on search and rescue at these types of occupancies, that fire is going to continue to grow and grow, and eventually it's just going to be to the point where we have to evacuate the building if we don't get water on the fire. So getting water on the fire is usually always going to make things better. Hazards we're going to encounter. Be aware that you could always encounter a power line. I've been on so many calls where I've almost walked on one. You know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You can't see it in the backyard. It reminds me of the near miss that DC Drake had that he reported, where the power line was down on a fence. Be aware that could happen. There could be a steep drop off on somebody's yard that you may not notice because it's dark. There could be holes in the ground. There could be big dogs in the backyard that you need to look out for. There could be a swimming pool in the backyard. There could be a number of different hazards that we need to look out for when we're conducting the 360 size up. Resources on scene and what is coming. We know what's coming because our mutual aid partners, our automatic aid partners, have been dispatched at the same time as us. So typically on a residential house fire, we're going to need 3 alarms to get enough manpower on scene to control the fire and to fill all the positions that we need to fill. Speed of fire progression. If we get on scene of a residential fire and you see kind of a laminar gray smoke, it's not moving very fast, it's not really dense, but it's got that gray color, and it's coming from the attic area. And 5 minutes later, before we even have a hand line in the house, it's starting to move with a greater velocity. The color is getting more dense, and it's moving with more velocity. Chances are that attic is going to be pretty well involved by the time we get the nozzle to the seat of the fire. So consider how fast the fire is moving and how fast it's growing and where it's going. So if the fire has already consumed the garage area, this reminds me of the explosion that took place a couple of years ago where the garage was heavily involved and it was already moving into the attic area. Let's start our 360 with the part of the structure that's not quite involved yet. Let's not start with looking at the big flames, because that's not going to give us a lot of information. And then the degree of involvement. Our policy is that our first engine in is going to go right into the scene, and they're not going to lay a supply line. But if you see heavy flames from a half mile away with black heavy smoke, we're not going to do a lot with our tank water to control that fire. So it's probably going to be a good idea at that point to lay a supply line on the way in, unless that second engine is right behind you. And consider the weather. Obviously, if it's really cold and we're in the dead of winter and the wind chill's 20 below zero, or if it's really hot and the temperature or the heat index is over 100, we're going to need more manpower on scene because our people are going to need more breaks. They're going to be going to rehab probably after every cylinder, and after 2 cylinders, they're going to be done. The time of day, obviously most people sleep at night, so we can assume that unless the house or the occupancy is fully evacuated, and someone can tell us that when we get on scene, if it's nighttime, we have to assume that it's going to be occupied. And exposures. If we have a structure that has a heavy degree of involvement, it's already gone, and we're going to be operating in a defensive mode. Our priority is no longer that structure. Our priority is to protect those exposures. Pre-incident survey info. If we can look at that before we get on scene, that's great, and that's something that lieutenants they can take advantage of that because they're not driving. But if we can determine where certain things are before we even get there, that's great. And what are we looking for? We're looking for the fire department connection. We're looking for where the HVAC units are. We're looking where the access points are. We're looking for where we have hydrants in the area. Where do we have our water supply? This is something that the RIT team can also use when they're in staging. They should be looking at the pre-incident surveys on commercial structures to familiarize themselves with the structure before they even go in. Water supply, we kind of talked about that already, and then access. If we have a road like a Rio Rogue Lane, where it's very tight, it's basically one lane, we have to consider that if we have a fire in that area, how are we going to get tenders in and out to shuttle our water supply? And then again, if we're not in that scenario and we have hydrants in the area, hopefully that second engine in knows where that hydrant is before they even get on scene. The mode of operation is usually determined after a 360 size up. The mode of operation can be announced during the initial on-scene report if conditions are obvious. Investigation mode, that means no smoke or flame showing upon arrival. The first arriving unit will be investigating the cause of the alarm, and incoming units can stage. Transitional mode, the first arriving unit makes an exterior attack on the fire prior to entering. This accomplishes two things. One, a water stream directed through a window or door can reset the fire and slow its progression. And two, cooling the exterior environment with a water stream can prevent flashover and make it safer for personnel entering the structure. If there's a water supply readily available, don't hesitate to use a master stream device immediately upon arrival. Offensive mode. This mode of operation is determined by two factors. Number one, there's smoke showing, but the location of the fire is unknown. The first arriving unit will enter the structure with a hose line and search for the seat of the fire after the arrival of additional personnel. Remember, we have to have 2 in, 2 out, and that 2 out backup team, only one person can be assigned to some other duty, such as being the EO, or we have somebody on door control. That second person can't be assigned to anything other than being on that 2 out team. I mentioned door control. It's important to control the flow path by maintaining door control as personnel advance toward the seat of the fire. Remember that an open door is just like any other vent opening, and that's going to control or affect the flow path of the fire. The second factor is the first arriving unit needs to take immediate action to protect life if there's somebody trapped. A rescue should be attempted without the 2 in, 2 out if there's definite information that somebody is trapped. Defensive mode, this mode of operation is determined when there's heavy fire involvement and the building is not safe to enter. We get on scene and there's heavy fire showing in a residential structure with lightweight truss construction. It's probably not going to take a lot of time before that building does collapse. So at that point, it'd be safe to announce that we're going to be operating in a defensive mode. Dispatch from Coit Avenue Command, 360 complete. The fire coming from the windows on side Bravo is going into the eaves. We'll be operating in a transitional mode. Engine 3 will be attacking the fire from Bravo side exterior. Have Engine 1 stretch an attack line to the Alpha side door and prepare to make entry. Make incoming units aware there's a power line down in the backyard. Since size up is such a critical part of slicers, we're going to touch on the rest of it. One thing that I didn't mention when I talked about doing our 360 size up report was declaring the mode of operation. Those modes of operation include rescue mode, fire attack mode, defensive mode, and investigative mode. L for locate the fire. Before we can attack the fire, obviously we must find it. So first arriving officers must use all resources necessary to make that determination, and that would include using your TIC for your 360 and using that to compare temperature differences from each side of the structure. This will help us develop a plan on how we can best attack the fire from a safe location. I for identify the flow path. The IC should identify the presence and, if possible, the location of the flow path. This is very critical. Every effort should be taken to control the flow path and the ventilation of the structure to help prevent the fire growth and protect victims. If the initial companies are able to identify the flow path, they should consider closing those doors and windows to limit the airflow. Cool the space from the safest location. Once you've completed your 360 and determined what tactics you're going to apply, the IC needs to determine if there are high heat conditions within the structure. When high heat conditions are found to be present, the IC, with the assistance with working companies, need to decide the most direct way to cool or reset the fire, keeping firefighter safety in mind. And when we're talking about cooling the space from a safe location, the fire is coming out of an open door or window, and we can access that from the outside. The primary goal of cooling the fire space is to reduce the thermal threat to occupants within the structure and to firefighting teams that are going to be entering the structure later. And if you're on an exterior attack team that's assigned to cool the space from the safe location, your radio benchmark would be fire has been reset. E for extinguish the fire. So once we have that high threat of heat that's been controlled by directing water streams through open doors and windows, now we need to get in there and make a direct attack to the seat of the fire. We need to ensure that all companies on the fire ground are not only extinguishing the bulk of the fire, but they're also revealing any hidden fires or void spaces that may contain high heat conditions. So we got to make sure that we're opening up any walls or ceilings that were in that fire area so we don't have a rekindle later. Other things that we need to worry about when we're conducting overhaul would be spaces behind kitchen cabinets, spaces behind molding, spaces around doors and windows. They need to be adequately overhauled to ensure that there's no hidden embers or hot spots. Now, if you're assigned to a fire attack team that's assigned to fire control, you're making entry into the structure, your radio benchmarks would include water on the fire or the fire is under control. The next two steps in this sequence are called actions of opportunity, and those are rescue and salvage. Obviously, rescue is our number one priority. We're always going to consider that to be one of our most important objectives. So the incident commander should always consider the potential for victims and rescues. And companies working on the fire ground should always be prepared to make rescues and assist occupants in exiting the structure. Remember that units assigned to fire suppression need to remain on fire suppression details until they get the fire knocked down. Remember, if you're assigned a fire attack, it's your job to knock that down so the situation doesn't get worse. If there is a need to conduct an immediate primary search, we want to try to do that at the same time as that attack team is putting water on the fire, ideally. Again, it's very situational based. If we have a structure and we have a fire on one end and we have somebody trapped in a bedroom on the other end of the structure, we could attempt a VEIS and make that rescue immediately. But if we don't know where that person is in the structure, a lot of times putting water on the fire is going to make that situation better. S for salvage, fireground companies should use compartmentalization whenever possible to control fire spread and smoke. Obviously, traditional tactics like placing salvage covers is always a great way to go. We always try to do that when we get enough personnel on scene. Remember, when we're on a fire scene, typically it's going to be somebody's worst day, and if we can try to keep their valuables safe by placing down salvage covers to limit the amount of water damage that's going to take place, or just removing valuable items from the structure, that will be greatly appreciated. So you're responding to a confirmed fire. We have fires showing out of multiple windows of an apartment building, and you get on scene and your company is assigned a RIT and everybody's shoulders just drop. You're thinking, we don't want to do this. We actually want to fight some fire. The next fire that you're on, this is you. Now you're in trouble. Who's coming to get you? Do you want those firefighters that when they're assigned a RIT, they just stand at the tarp and don't do anything? I don't know about you, but I want the Navy SEALs of firefighters to come and get me. I want somebody that's physically fit, I want somebody that's knowledgeable. I want somebody that's really familiar with rescue operations. Additionally, I want somebody that can remain calm and think clearly under pressure. That's because my life is now in their hands. I want somebody that's dedicated to this profession to be on that RIT team. When I'm inside a structure, I want a RIT team so I can have some kind of peace of mind that if I get in trouble, somebody is going to come in and get me. But there's also some regulatory standards that actually demand that we have a RIT team in place. OSHA 1910.134, procedures for IDLH atmospheres. It doesn't specifically say a RIT team, but we have to have 2 out. 2 in, 2 out during the duration of the incident. NFPA 1561, Incident Management Systems. It says you shall provide for the rescue of individuals operating at emergency incidents. NFPA 1500, that specifically provides for the requirement of a RIT team. NFPA 1407, that details the standard for RIT training. And then we have NFPA 1720, which also requires that we have a RIT team present when teams are operating interior. I've included a couple case studies on why we need RIT. On March 4th, 2000, apartment fire. This was 2 Fraser Department of Public Safety firefighters were trapped in a second-floor bathroom, unable to escape through a small window, and they were wearing SCBAs. The 2 firefighters were trying to rescue a resident when the second floor flashed over. One of those firefighters died when he ran out of air, and he was unable to escape from the interior of the burning residence. The firefighter was a 27-year-old male with 3 years on the job. He died of smoke inhalation, and his pack had to be cut off him to remove him from the bathroom. It was later reported that his low-pressure hose on his SCBA had burned through, and I don't have any information on whether or not a Mayday was called or even if a RIT team was deployed. This fire was a little bit more recent, May 8th, 2013, strip mall fire. I think most of us that were in the fire service at this time remember this very well. This was a Westland firefighter who dies after running out of air. The firefighter was a 29-year-old probationary employee, and he only had 9 months on the job. While exiting the structure that became too hot, the firefighter got separated from his team, and he followed the hose line back into the structure, towards the seat of the fire. The firefighter ran out of air and did not call a Mayday. Roughly 5 minutes after the firefighter reported out of air, at least he did that, dispatch set off tones for a Mayday on the fire ground. He was later caught in a flashover and the roof collapsed on him. I want to share some stats from Project Mayday. Project Mayday was conducted from 2015 to 2018. It involved over 4,300 career fire departments in 50 states. When they looked at the time that Maydays occur, we had 27% that occurred between midnight and 3 a.m., and then another 25% that occurred between 3 and 6 a.m. So over 50% of these fires that they were looking at occurred during hours where we would normally be sleeping, and we're not as sharp as we probably would be during the daytime. And then when it came to days of the week, it's really up in the air. 17% on Friday, 16% on Sunday. I don't think those numbers on the day of the week really mean a whole lot. Most Maydays occur between 15 and 17 minutes into the incident, or 7 to 9 minutes after the first company arrives. So chances are, if you're going to have a Mayday, you're going to be in that first arriving unit, and it's going to be within that first 10 minutes. When did the Mayday occur? 36% of Maydays occurred when RIT was on scene and established, but 64% occurred before RIT was established on scene because there's other things that the incident commander has to assign, such as ventilation, search and rescue, fire attack, and so on. So that gets established later into the scene. So obviously there's a need for RIT because firefighters go down. However, with that said, we have to be proficient in our self-rescue skills. So if we do encounter something in the first 10 minutes or even the first 20 before RIT is established, we're prepared to save ourselves. And that's why we've spent so much time in the past working on that. So there's only two stats on this slide that I want to focus on. The first one is when the 360 is completed. Out of all the Maydays that they evaluated, 61% of the time there was not a 360 size up completed. So if that officer would have completed a 360 and developed an operational game plan, there's a good chance that that Mayday wouldn't have occurred, compared to 23% of the time that they conducted the 360, there was a Mayday. So just completing that 360 drastically reduces our chances of a firefighter going down and having to send somebody in to help them. And the next stat related to the previous slide, where it talks about units involved in the Mayday, that first unit was involved 57% of the time. Well, that's not surprising considering on the last slide they talked about when the Maydays do occur. And that's 7 to 9 minutes after we first arrive on scene. So it's not surprising that first unit is usually involved. Firefighters never want to think of themselves as the weak link. And that's why I think that most of us would think twice about calling for a Mayday if we got ourselves in a little bit of trouble. And that's why this next slide doesn't surprise me at all, where 30% of firefighters that were involved in the Mayday thought about calling it long before they actually did. So if we're in that first 7 to 9 minutes on scene, we don't have a RIT team established. I can almost guarantee that. But if you are in trouble, you're lost, maybe you got entangled in a wire and you're going to try to get yourself out of trouble, you're going to attempt to self-rescue, call for that Mayday right away. That'll give the IC a little bit of lead time to start establishing a RIT team. Get people together to make that rescue if you can't get yourself out of trouble. Because it's no big deal to cancel it. In fact, it's something we can all talk about at the after-action review on why the Mayday was called and what did you do to get yourself out of it. And hopefully that's something that other people can learn from. When it comes to incident command, 67% of Maydays occur when command is mobile and they're walking around. And they're not in a fixed location. And I don't think that's something PFD has to worry about. Car 3 is usually our stationary command post. And that's where people know where to go. I think most of our command posts are usually pretty organized. Obviously, the exceptions are early into the incident scene where we don't have somebody on accountability right away and command is doing both jobs. But the scene is usually more organized when there's a command post. So I think that is probably a big factor when we're talking about 67% of the Maydays occur when command is just walking around. You don't have the organization. There's usually more chaos on scene. And that's why when we do arrive on a mutual aid incident, usually one of our chief officers will attach ourselves to that incident commander to ensure that we know what's going on as well. This slide indicates that there's no definite cause for a Mayday. You just can't focus on one thing because they're really all over the place. 20% falls into the basements, falls through the roof, 19.8%. I mean, they're really pretty close together. Air problem of 15.2%. But when you look at the first two, falls into the basements and falls through the roof, we're going back to the 360 there, because if we conducted a 360 when we first arrive on scene, using the thermal imaging camera, we can probably identify some of these issues so we don't put somebody into a basement when there's a big issue. We don't put somebody on the main floor when we have heavy fire involvement in a basement, or we don't put somebody on a roof when we have heavy fire involvement in lightweight truss construction. So those are probably the biggest takeaways from this slide. This next slide is a clear indicator on why we have spent so much time working on self-rescue techniques. Because 31.1% of the time when a Mayday is called, that person is able to self-rescue. Well, only 7% of the time they're being rescued by the RIT team. So why do we need a RIT team then? Well, we need a RIT team in case something happens later into the incident. But the reason those people aren't being rescued by the RIT team is because hopefully those people have been trained in self-rescue techniques, so they're able to get themselves out of trouble, and that's what we want that to happen. But I think they're only being rescued by the RIT team because generally when these maydays have been occurring, the RIT team hasn't been established yet, because think about what we talked about earlier. Those maydays are occurring 7 to 9 minutes after the first arriving unit gets on scene. So that RIT team has not been put in place yet. So it's a good reminder on why we have to continue to train and reinforce on those self-rescue techniques, because we can't always count on someone to come. We can't always count on having a team ready to come in and get us right away. Why do we need rapid intervention teams? Because we're responsible for the safety of all firefighters on scene, and when something bad happens, we need to be prepared to handle the situation. And of course, as I mentioned before, regulations and standards demand that we have a RIT team at the fire ground as soon as feasibly possible. And the fire ground is dynamic and ever-changing. And that reminds me of an incident I had about 2 or 3 years ago. It was the only Mayday situation that I've had to handle as an IC. It was at the tail end of an incident. Most of our personnel had cleared the scene at that point. We had all of our hose lines broken down, and Lieutenant Chavez went into the building to retrieve a tool that we thought was in there, and apparently he fell through the floor up to his waist. I heard Mayday, 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 and as the IC, I was completely unprepared to handle that situation. Fortunately, somebody was nearby, and they were able to assist him in getting him out. But as a lesson learned, we want to have that RIT team on standby until we're done going into the building, because that building has been weakened by fire, and it's been weakened by the amount of water that we've been throwing on it. The IC shall establish a 3 to 4 person RIT team as soon as reasonably possible. And I talked about all those other positions we have to fill, such as fire attack, backup line, ventilation, before we can get that RIT team established. It's the IC's discretion whether or not to rotate crews on the RIT team. There should always be a crew on deck to take their place. Now, by rotating crews have the advantage after going through a cylinder. They go through decon, they go through rehab, so hopefully they come back to forward staging fresh. And at that point, we can assign them to take another team's place as RIT, because they would have the added benefit of knowing the layout of the structure. Proactive RIT tests. When you're first assigned a RIT, you should be performing a RIT size-up. Do a 360 of the structure with a thermal imaging camera. What are we looking for there? We're looking for the degree of fire involvement. Is the fire getting worse, or is it getting better? Read the smoke. Is the smoke getting darker? Is the color changing? Is it starting to leave the structure with more velocity and more density? That'll tell you if conditions are getting worse or if conditions are getting better. Monitor where crews are coming in and out of the structure. By monitoring where crews are coming in and out, that's going to give us an idea on where they're going to be, hopefully. Look for other hazards that we can hopefully mitigate. Is there a power line down in the backyard? Do we have lighting set up by all the egress points? Identify the need for multiple RIT teams, especially on a commercial structure. Monitor fireground radio traffic, and by doing that, we're not just talking about listening for the Mayday. We're talking about how the situation is in the building. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Hopefully, by monitoring radio traffic, you can hopefully identify where crews are operating inside the structure. So if you are deployed, hopefully you have a good starting point there. Soften the structure. We're throwing ladders. If we're operating on a building where it's a 2 or 3 story building, we should be throwing ladders on all 4 sides of the structure. And we talked about in previous trainings on how to place those ladders. We want to place them just underneath the sill. So if somebody needs to get out, they're not going to get their gear or flashlight or anything else caught up on the tip of the ladder. Remove basement windows, bars, egress grates, etc. Prepare to force entry on doors. We want to make sure that we have all those tools ready. However, we want to make sure that we don't force doors until we're ready to enter, because we don't want to create another flow path for the fire. And always be ready to deploy at all times. We want to make sure that when we're doing our 360s, we're ready to deploy. Our tools and everything else we need are still in the cold zone. But by doing that, it would be advantageous for everybody to do it, not just the RIT team supervisor. So everybody gets a chance to see, everything that I just talked about. Everybody's monitoring the smoke and fire conditions. Everybody's monitoring where people are in the structure, so everybody has an idea in the event they have to go in and get somebody. In the event we have a mayday, there's only 3 parties that are going to stay on our fireground channel. That is going to be the incident commander, the RIT team supervisor, and the firefighter that's involved in the mayday. The incident commander is going to instruct everybody to go to a different channel. Everybody operating on the fireground channel, and that would be the people I just talked about, the IC, the RIT team supervisor, and the team that they're with, and the firefighter that's involved in the mayday, should try to keep radio traffic to a minimum. The RIT officer should be the only member of the RIT team on the radio. Information from inside would include progress reports. How are things going in locating the firefighter? Where are you inside the structure? Any hazards you may identify on the way. And then, of course, information from command, changing strategies. Are we going to come up with a plan B in case plan A doesn't work? Are we having another RIT team work from the outside to soften that structure a little bit more? Are we establishing and working on another game plan on how to get that firefighter out? And then, of course, command is going to update crews with any progress reports as well. Next are RIT radio benchmarks. The RIT team should be communicating the following: where they are making entry into the structure, RIT location changes in the structure. If they enter on the first floor, they should communicate to command that they're going to the second floor, or they're going to the third floor, etc. Firefighter located. Let command know what's going on, identify the firefighter problems and the level of consciousness, and report that to command. Report in the same message that the air supply has been secured or the face piece has been replaced. And then when you're starting to extricate the firefighter, let command know that and let them know where you're taking the firefighter so we can get a second team involved in that removal. And then once the firefighter is removed from the occupancy or the building, let command know and let them know that RIT has exited the structure and that you have a PAR. And then, of course, communicate any other problems that you might have. If you need more personnel to get the firefighter out, let command know as soon as possible. RIT positions and assignments. These are general assignments for RIT. They're not hard and fast. One would be the Search Firefighter 1, Search Firefighter 2, and that Search Firefighter 2 would be eliminated if we only have a 3-person RIT team. There needs to be a RIT supervisor, and there needs to be a firefighter assigned to navigation and air supply. The search firefighters will follow the commands from the RIT supervisor. One thing I want to talk about is who physically leads the search, and that is whoever has the tick in their hand. So if you are the RIT team supervisor and you want to physically lead the search, you got to do it from the front with the tick in your hand. If you want to pass off that responsibility to the search firefighter, that's fine, but that RIT supervisor should be second in the line. The RIT team will enter the structure first when a mayday is activated. They're going to perform an aggressive search to locate the downed firefighter. Once we do find the downed firefighter, one of the first things we'd want to do is we want to silence their pass device, because we really can't properly assess the firefighter with their pass device sounding. But we also want to be able to communicate with command and let them know that we found the downed firefighter, and we want to communicate their condition. Let them know what they're doing. Let the IC know what we're doing. And then we also, as the search firefighter, you want to assist that firefighter that brought in the RIT bag with securing the firefighter's air supply. And how do we do that? Remember, we do not want to use the butted breathing hoses. We want to use the universal air connection. And we want to have that universal air connection, we want to have that ready to go. The cylinder should already be turned on, and the end of the UAC should be already out of the bag so we don't have to look for it. The other search firefighter will perform a quick search, and they're looking for a secondary means of egress. So if we went in the front door and they wind up being on the second floor and there's an easier way to get that firefighter out, we want to take advantage of that. And of course, that search firefighter is going to be responsible for helping to remove that firefighter, the downed firefighter, from the structure. The RIT supervisor needs to be calm, decisive, and they need to display a strong sense of leadership. They're also assigning the RIT positions before the team is even activated. So as you're in staging or while you're doing your 360, be assigning those positions to personnel so they know what they're going to be doing before the activation occurs. They're going to direct and oversee all RIT activities. So most of the time we only have one team operating in the structure, but in the event we have two, that RIT supervisor is going to be directing personnel on both teams. Only one, they're going to be the only one to communicate with command, as I talked about before, unless that person has an emergency. And they're going to maintain communication between searchers and the air navigation firefighters. Ultimately, it's their responsibility to oversee everybody on their team, and they should know where everybody's at all times. Maintain accountability of your RIT team air supply, and that's very important, especially when we're operating in a commercial structure where it's going to take us longer to get to a downed firefighter. To go along with that, when we do find the downed firefighter, it's important to assess everybody's air supply at that point, because we need to determine if we need another team in there to get that firefighter out. The RIT officer will tie off the tagline near the downed firefighter once they are found or before exiting the structure. And that tagline, if we have to exit the structure, is going to be used for the next team to find them. Enters the building after the search before the air navigation firefighter. Typically, I would think that that person is going to be second in line, and the search firefighter is going to be carrying the tick, and the RIT supervisor should be directing operations. And as the RIT supervisor, you should be the last one to exit the building. Responsibilities of the air navigation firefighter. They're going to be responsible for securing the tagline to something solid outside the structure. Now, do we go in with just the tagline, or do we go in with a hose line? Obviously, that's situational based. If we're going into an area that has any kind of fire involvement, we should have a hose line. Obviously, if we can do that with a tagline, we're going to be able to move much faster, especially if we have teams already inside putting water on the fire. Responsible for transporting emergency air supply and the tagline throughout the operation. They're going to be transporting both the rope RIT bag and the RIT pack. They're responsible for securing the emergency air supply to the downed firefighter by using the UAC connection. They're going to assist the search firefighter to convert and extricate the downed firefighter by converting their SCBA into a drag device. When searching for the downed firefighter, we want to be moving rapidly, but we also want to be searching systematically. We definitely need to move with a sense of urgency. Before we enter the structure, there should already be a plan that's been communicated to all team members, so that search is effective and systematic. However, that plan may need to be improvised as we move throughout the structure. Be sure to communicate with the downed firefighter and command as you move throughout the structure. Give progress reports. A tagline is highly recommended. Most of the time, if we do have a mayday, it's probably going to be in an idealized environment. Smoke conditions are probably going to be heavy. We don't want to be in a position where we get ourselves turned around and we're not oriented when we're in the structure. A hose line, as I talked about before, is another option if the tagline is not. A mayday has been called and the RIT team has been activated. Before the RIT supervisor can develop an operational game plan on how to find the fallen firefighter, they should perform a quick 360. And they're listening for the firefighter's pass device. They're listening for the volume that the firefighter is going to make from banging their tool against a wall or a floor. Hopefully the noise from their pass or from the banging of their tool can give us an idea on where they're located in the structure. When we do enter, we want to stay oriented, and we can only do that by performing a conventional right or left-handed search. That doesn't mean we have to go into every room and completely search that room. We can perform a six-sided scan, and a six-sided scan means scanning the four walls, the ceiling and the floor, and the area behind the door. We only have to search those areas that we can't see behind with the tick. To go along with that, if we can hear their pass device elsewhere in the structure, that's a room that we can just completely bypass. And rope assisted would pertain to not a tagline, but if we're operating in a large commercial structure with big wide open areas, we're going to have a tagline that's attached to an anchor on the outside of the building, but we may also have to have the search firefighters use their personal rope to tag off that line to search other areas as well. Assessing, stabilizing, and packaging a downed firefighter. As team members, we always want to stay calm. We want to think and make educated decisions to prevent anything else bad from happening. When we do find the fallen firefighter, let's try to isolate ourselves from fire conditions in the structure by closing the door. Immediately assess the downed firefighter after turning off their pass device. Assess current fire conditions. Are they getting worse? Do we need to maybe move that firefighter to a different location before we can even think about removing them from the structure? We also want to assess the RIT members' physical condition and their air supply. Did the team have to work really hard to find the fallen firefighter? Are they physically drained and is their air supply low? If that's the case, we need to think about getting another team in there as soon as possible to help with the firefighter removal. Stabilize the firefighter by securing their air supply with the UAC connection. And then, of course, we want to package the downed firefighter. If they can assist in helping, to get them out, that would be great. If not, we need to work on some kind of plan on how we're going to remove them from the structure. One thing we can do is convert their SCBA into an improvised harness for dragging them out. Firefighter rescue techniques. Every rescue will require a combination of techniques. There's no one technique that's always going to work in one situation. And in this assignment, there's going to be a variety of videos that are going to go over a number of different ways to move a fallen firefighter. So they're not going to be in this presentation. But teamwork in any of these scenarios is critical, and we can only do that through good communication. We want to make sure that everybody's working on the same page. The firefighter at the head will be initiating those commands. An example would be ready for the preparatory command. If there's no objections from the crew, the next command will be to execute the lift, drag, push, pull. Typically what I see is 1, 2, 3, push, 1, 2, 3, push, or 1, 2, 3, pull, and so on. Whatever you're doing, just make sure that everybody knows what the plan is and how you're going to get them out of the structure, so everybody's working on the same page. The RIT staging area is the bank of equipment used to rescue a downed firefighter. It's everything that we're going to need in our toolbox on the apparatus to get somebody out. Having the right equipment in your staging area will drastically reduce the amount of time required in a rescue operation. If we have to go back to the platform, which is 400 feet down the road to get a Stokes basket, that's just going to be a delay that we're going to have in getting that firefighter out. So have all that equipment ready and at your disposal on the RIT tarp. The staging area should be set up as soon as possible, preferably right after you do your 360 size up of the structure. Statistically, the most dangerous time on the fire ground is within the first 20 minutes, so we want to get that RIT staging area set up as soon as possible. The RIT staging area should be located just outside the warm zone near the casualty collection point. Again, as they talked about in the EMS training, if we do have multiple casualties, we want to be in a position where we can communicate with EMS and we can let them know where we're bringing all of our casualties from that incident. We want to be outside the warm zone because we don't want to be in an IDLH environment. We don't want to be taking in the smoke unless we absolutely have to. The only time the RIT team should be in the warm zone is when they're conducting their 360 size ups. And those 360 size ups should take place every 5 to 10 minutes. When we have larger structures, such as a commercial building or an apartment building, there's probably going to be a need for multiple RIT teams due to the size of the structure. And those RIT teams should be staging on different corners of the structure. So one would be on the AB corner, the A Alpha Bravo corner, and the other team would be located on the Charlie Delta corner of the structure. As soon as we make 2 or 3 RIT teams, even 2 teams, now that it's no longer 2 teams, it's a group. And that RIT group supervisor is in charge of both teams, regardless on where they're located on the incident scene. We're going to have a RIT team at every incident that we go on, and the RIT members and the RIT tools should be staged in the same area whenever possible. I don't see any reason why the RIT team would not be staged near where they have all their tools. And for obvious reasons, we would expect all RIT members to be proficient with all the tools that are on the tarp. Basic RIT firefighting tools, and this is just a general non-inclusive list, would include the RIT tarp, the RIT pack, which would include the RIT cylinder and a spare face piece, a tagline, a set of irons for force and entry, ground ladders, hopefully enough ground ladders to ladder every side of the structure, a hose line as needed. There's no reason why the RIT team should not have a hose line ready to go. If you don't need to bring it in, that's all right, but if you do, it's there. You don't have to waste time deploying that from the engine and charging that. Wire cutters, a thermal imaging camera, webbing and power saws. And when you're considering the type of power saw that's going to be on the tarp, consider the type of construction that we're dealing with, because that's going to dictate the type of saw that you need to breach. Is one tarp enough? Probably not. We want to be in a position where we can provide medical care to a firefighter once they're removed from the structure. So all the EMS supplies that should be included on the second tarp should include the trauma burn bag, the EMT bag, the jump bag, the AED, collar bag, ECOT, and the Stokes basket from Platform 3. Unfortunately, I can't put together one list of tools that are going to apply to every incident that we go on. It's very situational based, and it's going to depend on the type of construction as well. This is why RIT teams should be constantly reassessing the situation to maybe add tools to their toolbox and put them on the tarp so they're easily accessible. Take the time to anticipate which tools will be needed to locate, assess, stabilize, and transfer the downed firefighter. If we're working in a commercial structure where there's going to be a long stretch to reach that fallen firefighter, think about the easiest way of removing the firefighter. Would a Stokes basket make a lot of sense? And recognize the need for additional tools before it's too late. RIT operations are not rapid at all. A RIT operation must be handled as a separate incident. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but if you hear the mayday when you're inside a structure and you're already assigned to a duty, you need to keep doing whatever you've been assigned to do. So if you're on fire attack, keep suppressing the fire. It's important to do that so the situation doesn't get worse. If you're assigned to ventilation, keep performing those ventilation duties so maybe we can get some of those combustible gases out of the structure and make the situation better. The only time you should go after that fallen firefighter that's declared the mayday would be if you're very close to them. If you're very close to them, leave somebody on that hand line or two members on that hand line and assess that firefighter and see what you can do to help them before the RIT team gets there. But in an ideal world, you keep doing what you're doing. RIT operations are going to be very taxing mentally and physically for everybody involved. And they're expanding out to mutual aid companies. When we have a RIT or a RIT deployment, we have a mayday, we should be calling for at least one additional alarm, and we should also be declaring an EMS Plan 1. So we have additional ambulances responding to the scene to treat the fallen firefighter, but they're also there for emergency medical care for the RIT team members involved in the incident as well. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Thank you very much.